Having worked 7 years in law enforcement and 14 years for the federal government, the witness considered himself a trained observer who had seen lots of things in his years of service. However, nothing could prepare him for what he saw on the morning of April 17, 2005. It was 5:30 a.m. The witness was on his way to work, traveling south on Shaver Road from Osterhout in Portage, Michigan. Sugarloaf Lake was just a few hundred yards in front of him. On that particular morning, he noticed that the road by the lake was unusually thick with fog. In the road, further on, he saw what looked like a red and white strobe light. His first thought was that this was an accident scene, probably caused by this heavy fog. As he got closer, though, the lights suddenly seemed to vanish. As I drove through the fog seemed different, almost like steam. Since I could no longer see the lights, I slowed as I didn't want to run off the road or into the fire truck. I decided to put my windows down to listen, and that's when the hair on my neck began to stand up. There was not a single sound other than my car, not a bird, cricket, or anything else. It was a scene right out of the movies. I have noted this eerie quietness often in the vicinity of UFOs or other paranormal phenomena in previous videos. As well, I have also talked about a strange fog described by some witnesses sighted in and around UFOs, most notably in the Gray and Stevens video. The witness continued driving. As he passed the lake, he noticed on his right the strange lights again. They seemed to be out in the water about 20 feet off the ground and maybe 30 or 40 feet long. The fog was so thick I didn't see what the lights were attached to. They were a series of strobe-type lights, one red, then several white, that went from right to left. As I went another 75 yards, the fog was gone, and so were the lights. Everything seemed to have vanished. From there, he turned onto the highway and looked to his right. He could see part of the lake, which was now surprisingly clear. No fog, no lights, nothing. Deeply disturbed by the event, the witness began to change how he went to work. I stopped going that way at that point and began taking a different route. I have no idea where the lights went to. One might speculate that they were from a UFO, but I did not see a craft through the fog, only the lights. I went back that way a few more times over the next few days trying to figure out what I saw. To this day, I have no clue. On the night of June 19, 2014, an officer doing a routine patrol in Anderson Park in Wheat Ridge, Colorado at around 1 a.m. claims to have encountered something very strange. Near the back of the park, he observed some odd lights. As I began driving towards the back, I see 5 or 6 lights, 2 red, 2 blue, and 2 green, or it was 2 red, 3 blue, and 1 green. The lights were near a tree line on the other side of a softball field and about 150 yards away. The lights were clustered around each other at various heights in a kind of oval shape. I would estimate the lights were clustered around something the size of a car and were about 3 feet away from each other. He noted that the lights looked like LED quality light and were as bright as car headlights and not moving. Each light was about the size of a softball. As he drove into the park, he noticed the lights did not change in intensity or move like a directional light would, as one would move a flashlight around. As I drove, I observed the lights from about the 5 o'clock to the 4 o'clock position, covering about 50 yards, and there was no change in intensity of the light or any idea as a direction they were pointing, thus giving me the impression they were some kind of a dome light or spherical in nature. I could not see any beams of light that lit up the grass or trees around it like a car headlight would do. He watched the lights for about 5 seconds, and then all of a sudden the lights went out simultaneously. To clarify, there was no way the light was emitted from separate sources. The lights went out at exactly the same time and had to have been controlled from a single source. I called this out on the police radio, saying I was going to check the park as I had just seen some strange lights. The radio works just fine. The officer went over to the area and observed that the trees and grass were frosted over with freezing dew, and he could see his breath. The low that night was 52, so it was probably about 55 degrees, possibly lower due to the proximity of nearby Clear Creek. I did not observe this frost anywhere else in the city that night, and I was near another water source in a different part of town about 2 miles away. and 1 hour earlier and did not observe the frosting of the vegetation. From there, the officer turned on his spotlight. He saw what appeared to be snow falling in the beam of his lights, and he remembered thinking, "Is it snowing? No, it's too warm. Is this ash from a forest fire? No, there's no fire and I don't smell smoke." He then walked out onto the freshly frosted grass and saw no signs of disturbance on the grass. This is when an intense sense of fear came over him. There is a bike path near there, so I go to the bike path and turn off my flashlight and stand still for about 20 seconds to see if I can hear anything, like kids laughing. As I'm standing in the half-moon light, my hand goes to my gun, and I think to myself slowly, I'm going to go back to my car. It wasn't a physical feeling that made me feel uneasy, but not knowing what I was dealing with made me feel vulnerable. I went back to my patrol car and throughout the night parked nearby to see if the lights came back, and they never did. The officer went back to the area just as the sun was coming up, but he did not observe any signs on the ground. He noticed the vegetation was no longer frosted. The only rational explanation I can think of is that these were lights on an ATV on the bike path, but they were arranged asymmetrically and did not appear to be directional. But I would imagine I would have seen the lights move as the ATV drove down the bike path or heard the vehicle driving away. Furthermore, the path goes into the trees, and driving an ATV as fast as it would have to have gone, for me not to hear it, it would be insane without lights. There was a traffic signal about 50 yards behind me, but the colors I saw were different hues than traffic signal colors, and I have driven that area at that time 100 times and never seen this. There was no water on my windshield, and it was too clear to be a reflection. October 20, 1979, a military police officer working at a military installation in upstate New York, Seneca, observed something strange while on patrol. I was in a vehicle in charge of a special 5-man team that was patrolling on the base and outside the perimeter of the base. We were to stay away from the rest of the platoon of MPs that were on guard duty inside the restricted area, the man wrote in his report to the Mutual UFO Network. The witness recalled that it was chilly that night. It was a little after 5 a.m. and still quite dark. He told his driver to park at the plant inside the restricted area and position the vehicle so that they could watch the civilians entering the site at 6 a.m. He told the team to rest until the civilian workers started to arrive. It was during this wait something strange began to unfold in front of the witness. I was sitting in the passenger side up front and just looking out at the plant. A sphere of light dropped down out of the sky probably 800 to 1,200 feet right in my line of sight at the other end of the parking lot just above the tree line. It was just hovering there, a sphere of light. The witness claims that it was a hovering, spinning light. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. He started yelling for the other men to look. Just as I did that, it zigzagged right-left about 5 times while going up and disappeared in the sky. Never saw anything move that fast and with a zigzag motion. The entire sighting lasted between 2 and 3 seconds, and apparently none of the other men saw it. Witness claims that he never reported it. September 20th, 2001, a former police officer driving to Waupaca, Wisconsin with his family observed a fireball in the night sky. He initially thought it was a burning airplane falling from the sky until the object turned and headed his way, leaving a trail of red smoke in its wake. He immediately woke up his wife in the passenger seat, alerting her to the strangeness transpiring in front of him. The object traveled about 3 miles to my location and turned into a metallic cylinder with fire emitting from holes along the side. It was completely silent. The man claims that he could see what looked like windows on the side of the object. In those windows stood beings who appeared to be looking out. From there, the man pulled over to the shoulder of the road and turned off his engine. I looked at it and prayed. I did not reach for my weapon or my camera because I did not want to put my family at risk. As I began to wake up my son, who was sleeping in the back seat, the object turned into a bright white straight line, pointing in a downward direction. At this point, he noticed a pulsating white light on the ground across the road. He believed that the object had landed somewhere close by. He was suddenly overcome with fear. He quickly started his car and drove away. After arriving at his destination, he told some friends and even contacted the Waupaca Sheriff Department, who told him that they had not received any calls that night regarding strange lights, aerial objects, or anything else. He did a check of the area the next day and discovered what he believes to be evidence that the object had indeed landed in a stream. I am a former police officer and I have practiced law for 30 years. I have told few people about my encounter. It's interesting that the man claims he pulled over and turned off his car, placing himself and his family in possible danger. This is certainly not normal behavior, but it does line up with other abductee reports, people behaving oddly after sighting a UFO or beings, as if under some type of mind control. In his report, he indicated a very strange communication, a promise he made to the UFO or whomever was piloting it, that he would not go public with what he saw. He admits that he has been plagued with terrible nightmares ever since the event. This suggests a type of mental communication and possibly more. Is it possible that this man and his family were abducted and he simply does not remember it? He does not indicate any missing time, but his experience as written is quite vague. It certainly seems like certain details have been left out either by his choice or someone else's. Three retired police officers were in upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains on a fishing expedition when they observed something quite bizarre from across the lake. This case was related to Albert Rosales by Eileen G. for inclusion in his Humanoid journals. While it is not necessarily scary, it is an interesting account of humanoid beings as seen by former law enforcement officials. It was April 18, 2004, nighttime. The three friends had just returned to the shore after being out fishing. As they were tying the boat to the dock, the witness noticed a blue light flash across the lake. He looked up to watch it, as did his two friends. The color of the flash reminded him of a black light, and appeared to be about the size of a softball tossed into the air. The three friends watched this light for 5 to 6 seconds as it started to slow down. As it reached the opposite side of the lake, the object seemed to almost halt in the sky. It then started to descend on the other side of a now-defunct farm silo. The three officers knew that nobody had lived on that farm for nearly 10 years. The men watched as the light came down into the area of the farm. It was no longer visible in the sky, but they could still see the colored glow shining into the air. Thinking that it was suspicious, the retired police officers decided to investigate. They quickly untied their ropes and jumped back into the boat. In about 5 minutes, they were back across the lake and docking the boat at a friend's dock. The friend was away at the time. They peered in the direction of the light, which was approximately 300 yards away. The light was now pulsating, was no longer a steady glow. They determined that it was just behind the old silo, and they cautiously, with pocket knives in hand, made their way to the area. When they reached the silo, suddenly the glow became solid again and stopped pulsing. They slowly, walking side by side, made it around to the other side of the silo. What they saw would leave them in total shock. There, behind the silo, sat a glowing sphere about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was black light in color and transparent. Inside of the object, they saw what looked like two humans, a male and female, sitting facing one another. It looked like they were sitting in the air, as there were no visible seats beneath them. The woman had long blonde hair and was clothed in gray and black. The male had medium-length blonde hair with similar clothing. Their description seems to match what we call the Nordics. The three witnesses, now 25 or 30 feet away from the object, watched for a few seconds before they looked at each other and almost simultaneously said, "Are we really seeing this?" They whispered to each other about what they were looking at. They focused on the two beings. They appeared to both have their hands pressed against each other's, and their eyes were closed. The sphere surrounding them had an almost fluid look to it, yet seemed solid at the same time. The main witness nervously pulled out his cigarettes and went to light one. When he did, the female turned and looked directly at him. "Great, now we've been seen," one of his friends said. Strangely, none of the men claimed to have felt fear in their presence. The female looked at them and smiled very pleasantly. She took one hand away from her mate's. He too turned and looked directly at them and also smiled. The men described it as humbling. The three looked at each other stunned, not sure what to make of these beings. The female began to move her hand. To them it looked as if it was a slight wave, and the male proceeded to follow. One of the men raised his hand to wave back, although he isn't sure why he did that. The other two friends did not move. At this point, the female then reached her hand outside of the sphere and picked up what looked like some grass off the ground. They then closed their eyes again, put their hands back up to one another's, and the sphere began to ascend slowly at about the speed of a helicopter. The only noise emitted was a very faint hum, not unlike how a household ion air cleaner sounds. The object rose to about 50 or 60 feet, and they could see that both the male and female were looking down at them. They could see their heads turn and look down in their direction. Shortly after, the sphere took off quite rapidly. It got smaller and smaller, ascending maybe 20 feet every couple of seconds. It took off directly toward the constellation of Orion, which was visible in the clear night sky, until they could not see the sphere anymore.